You're listening to the Talking Headways Podcast Network. This is Talking Headways, a weekly podcast about sustainable transportation and urban design. I'm Jeff Wood. This week we're joined by Phoenix community builder Tim Sprague. We chat about supporting local culture through development projects and the importance of sustainable development and transportation. Stay with us. Today's podcast was produced in partnership with Impact, formerly Railvolution. For a deeper dive on livability issues or to check out the 2023 Impact Transit and Mobility Conference in Phoenix, Arizona, visit impactmobility.org, mpactmobility.org. Today's podcast is brought to you by our wonderful, amazing Patreon supporters. Your support is critical to Talking Headways and Mondays at the Overhead Wire. We really appreciate it. To join this gang of zoning misfits and transportation rabble-rousers, go to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. $2 a month gets you some stickers and a handwritten note. $10 a month gets you one of our transportation scarves. Thanks so much to everybody who supports the show, from the bus drivers to the advocates all around the world. That's patreon.com/theoverheadwire. And for more information on our work and where to find our daily newsletter, the transportation scarves, our Cars Are Cholesterol merch, buy books from the authors that join us on the show at our bookshop affiliate site, or find our audiobook version of Raymond Unwin's Town Planning and Practice, check out the show notes on your podcatcher, or visit theoverheadwire.com. Tim Sprague, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you much.
Thanks for being here. Before we get started, my first question to you actually is, are you staying cool?
Am I staying cool? Wow, you would not believe it. I'm going to look at my watch here. It says 1:14. 1:14 outside of Phoenix. Yeah, it's a little toasty here. It's funny, I was speaking with a friend. We've paid for this because May and June were delightful.
Yeah,
they really were. Much cooler than normal. So we're having to pay for it now. But, you live here long enough, you get used to it.
I've heard that before, but that's hard to believe. I mean, you have new records for being over 110 degrees. You all just set a record last night for the highest low of 97 degrees.
The highest low of 97. We've had, I think it's 19 days over 110.
Oh my gosh.
And don't let anybody tell you that there's climate change going on, because I don't think so.
Well, before we get started with our main discussion, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Originally from Oklahoma. I'm a big-time Oklahoma Sooner fan.
Oh, no.
I am. The Longhorns. There you go. Go Horns, yeah. So I have spent many an October weekend in Dallas, Texas, watching games. So you know what that's like.
Absolutely.
Grew up there, went to college at Oklahoma, went to law school there, practiced law in Dallas for several years, and left Dallas and came to Phoenix to join my father-in-law in the development business. And truly, I left the law practice because I was tired of solving other people's problems, that I wanted to solve my own. And I've always been around the creative side of things. I play in a rock and roll band. I'm very much into art and those kind of things. And being a developer allows that creative part of me to come out. So I joined my father-in-law and unfortunately discovered he had leukemia literally 3 days after I moved here, and he died 2 months later. So I was thrown into the deep end of the swimming pool in Phoenix, Arizona. He had 4 Canadian partners from the Edmonton, Alberta area that I basically took over a very small operation that had his admin assistant and a salesperson that was selling the condos that we were building. We had just, right at the end of completing one project, had just broken ground on a second one. And I was thrown at the front of the wheel. And thankfully, the Canadian partners liked me and I liked them, and the rest is history. So we have gone on from there, and evolution has happened through the company that we've had. My brother-in-law, my wife's brother, and son of the gentleman that passed, is my partner and has been since the early 80s. Came in and joined me when he got out of school, and we've been together ever since. And our company, Habitat Metro, was actually established back in 2004, I believe. That was an offshoot of our company, Sprague and Hill. His name is John Hill. And Habitat Metro was established to focus upon downtown infill type development. And in 2003, we became involved and responded to an RFP from the city of Phoenix to develop a piece of property that was on the light rail that had been announced in Phoenix. And at that time, light rail was just, nobody had really heard of it. And the reason why we were excited, we did 2 projects up in Portland, Oregon, in a suburb called Lake Oswego. And we heard about this concept called light rail when we were up there doing those projects. But we finished them and ended up selling them. and went back to Portland to visit and were blown away by how transformative light rail was for the city. And so we said, well, okay, if Phoenix is really going to do this, we're in. So we applied for, responded to the RFP, and were successful and built our first project on light rail, which is called Portland Place, which is a condominium project that is built overlooking a 32.5-acre park that's called Hance Park, where Interstate 10 goes through the middle of Phoenix. And the original plan that ADOT, the Arizona Department of Transportation, and the federal government had was to build this huge freeway going through the middle of town, literally tearing the neighborhoods apart, displacing 250 historic homes with an above-ground overpass. Homeowners Association called the Roosevelt Action Association was formed by the neighbors. They fought it, and the compromise was to depress the freeway below grade and create this 32-acre park by a series of 19 bridges side by side. And the person that negotiated that compromise was the mayor at the time, a gal named Margaret T. Hance, who was quite a gal, and it pulled it together, and it worked. And we built the first project of high end overlooking that park next to light rail.
That's awesome.
So it's a long story to get to where I am today. We're still doing infill development, but yeah, the influence for us, truly for what we do today in infill, was what we saw up in Portland, Oregon, and how transformative light rail was for that.
Well, that's interesting. What did you see in Portland? Was there anything specific? We all hear about Portland. We talk about transit and development.
Yeah, well, the Pearl District up in Portland. If you ever were in Portland before the Pearl District, it was not a place that was desirable. I mean, completely turned things around. Interesting, my father knew a gentleman that his family had a chain of furniture stores up in Portland, and I knew him. And one of his stores, one of the least profitable stores that they had, was in an area that they were really thinking about shutting it down. Light rail came along, and it turned out to be one of their better stores. I mean, it's really amazing how transformative good transportation can be. We saw that, and we've always had an affinity for downtown, and hopefully that would become something cool, if you will. And light rail came in, and when that was established, that it was really going to happen, we were in.
That's really interesting. We've talked about the Pearl District and the freight yards that used to be there and the streetcar and all of the development that's happened there. But let's talk about Phoenix a little bit. I want to know a little bit more about what Phoenix means to you and how you reflect the city of Phoenix in your development projects.
Well, I moved out here in the early 80s, and at that time, downtown Phoenix was truly a suburban city. The downtown area, the urban area, had really been abandoned. The large department stores had all moved out. Everything had gone to the suburbs at that time, and it was hurting. I mean, no question about it. The first, I like to call it the big rock that was put in the jar, if you will, to help out, was the Suns Arena, where the Phoenix Suns play. And then the next big rock was the baseball stadium for the Arizona Diamondbacks. And then at that point, the convention center was starting to be redone and things had started. But you had all the great big rocks, but none of the smaller stuff. I like to say the grains of sand that come in around that in the jar and really provide the activity, provide the environment, provide the culture that lures people there. Well, a group of us around downtown, when we put our stake in the ground to do the RFP for the Portland Place condo project, there was a group of us that were really into good music, really into art, and wanted to try to create a downtown. And literally over the last 15 years plus, it's happened. It's worked. And it's because of really a neighborhood, the Roosevelt Action Association that I told you about, of those folks being devoted to the park that was in their neighborhood. The park was dedicated in 1992 with a lot of grandiose things that were supposed to be there. The city and the state ran out of money. They did put the green in. It's nice, but that's it. And we've renovated the park. I was head of the Hance Park Conservancy to help get that done. And we're in the process of that renovation project. So that's happening. And the other thing in downtown is that these are the local folk. These are the restaurants that are the local people that have come in. They're not chains. The Arts District is right at the corner of Central and Roosevelt, which is right where our projects are located. It's thrived. The Arts District light rail stop is one of the most traveled ones on the circuit. And downtown has just evolved. They give you a sense of how much change has taken place. Within the miles circuit of our park and where our projects are located, at the end of 2014, there were 5,900 people that lived within that mile radius. 4 years later, that had exponential growth to a little over 12,000 folk. And if you take that 2018 number and project it out today, we're probably about 23, 24,000 people within that same radius now. And that kind of activity is taking place very quickly. And the other thing that took advantage of light rail, which was very, very smart, was Arizona State University putting a downtown campus in Phoenix. And very quickly, literally in like 3 or 4 years, Arizona State has a population at that school at 15,000 kids. It's on the light rail, connects to Tempe, where the main campus is, and it brought a great deal of life to that part of the world.
Tell me a little bit about the history of Roosevelt and Roosevelt Row, because it has a really deep history in Phoenix.
Sure. It really became the place where artists gravitated to because rent was cheap. It was an area that the artists had kind of been around. There were some galleries, not of any significance, but started to come out. There's a gal by the name of Kimber Lanning, close friend, who started an operation this nation that she's very involved in a state level called Local First. And it was to promote local retail. She has an art gallery there, and a good friend of mine sold her the building so she could have a presence and put a stake in the ground for a long time. And there's 4 or 5 other people that are around that area at Central and Roosevelt that have been around the art community and have put art galleries, have been involved in helping people with restaurants get started, in entertainment. Now there's a jazz club called the Nash that is in that area, and they have more jazz productions than any other place in the country, if you can believe that. And the arts are there. We have a hotel that we renovated, an old Best Western that's just right off that intersection. It's called the Foundry, and it's spelled FOUND:RE. We wanted to change the noun into a verb, and the RE is our signature of, this is where you come. And it's an arts boutique hotel. The hotel itself is a gallery. All the art that's on the wall transitions 3 times a year, and it's all for sale. And 104 keys and a great restaurant called Match that is fun. It's got a market to it. And it's at one of the local spots. The town originally had its first shopping center. When I say the town, I mean the town. Phoenix as a town had its first shopping center on Roosevelt in 1923. And it was considered very far outside of town. To give you an idea what the context is today, our old downtown redevelopment area map goes up to Roosevelt. So it goes from the outskirts of town to the center of town in terms of what's there. The amount of development going on downtown is phenomenal right now.
It sounds amazing. And 24,000 people is quite a few. And I imagine that kind of brings up some tensions too in terms of development, the potential for displacement, those types of things. I'm wondering, kind of what bringing that amount of people into a space means for the area and for the folks that lived there before and people that live there now.
Well, it's a really good point. And I will tell you that the Roosevelt neighborhood is very unique. The concept of not in my backyard was not part of their vocabulary. The Roosevelt neighborhood realized that this was a way for a rebirth to take place, for a renaissance to take place. And the Roosevelt neighborhood, all of us literally went out and put out the flag saying, we're open for business. Come and talk to us about developing in our neighborhood. We're very pro-development, but pro-good development, making sure that the neighborhoods were respected and making sure that the questions were answered from the neighbors at the time that we did things. I mean, as I said, we were the first folks to do anything of any size around light rail. I mean, I literally had my renderings and my coffee thermos going door to door on Saturday morning, talking to folk, telling them what we wanted to do and listening to them. The best story I can have is that we were asked to give a presentation at a neighborhood meeting that took place in August, if you can imagine, outside of this park. And they wanted us to come and make the presentation. Well, I'm there, it's hot as it can be. It's 6:30 at night. I've got my renderings. We get through. Good questions were asked, and I was trying to respond to most of them. And I'm a firm believer in doing it myself rather than hiring a lawyer to come in a suit to do that, because I'm the person that can answer the questions and ask questions. At the end of it, they were going to have a meeting to talk about the neighborhood home tour for the Roosevelt neighborhood. And I asked if I could stay, and we did. And there's an old shopping center that I told you about in 1923 that was built. That's called the Gold Spot. That was just being redone by some folks that I know. And they were going to have that be the headquarters for the home tour. And they wanted to put a bar there. It was vacant space and they needed some volunteers. Well, I worked my way through law school attending bars. So I raised my hand and I became a member of the neighborhood. And so I got to know most folks from the right side of the bar, if you will, and got involved, became a member of the Roosevelt Action Center board and was termed out after 6 years. And we've been very involved in the neighborhood ever since. So for a neighborhood that is old, trying to have a rebirth and renaissance, the flag was put out, a welcome flag, if you will, to come in and let's develop. And as a result of that, I think a lot of things that would have been difficult to do worked. But what I've learned, and I think most people have learned in doing work in an infill environment, you have to listen. You have to really make sure that you hear what the neighborhood's like today, because you're going to change it. And they know what the important things are and what things you have to look out for. And every time you can find an idea from theirs that is great, celebrate the heck out of it because they know what's going on.
What did you learn behind the bar? Is there anything that came up?
Yeah, no, truly. I learned that art was really important to them. I learned that their values were to have a neighborhood where they could walk to entertainment, where they could walk to dining, and it would be safe. And at the time that we were looking at this as a possible deal to do, all of our contemporaries here in town, our peers, told us we were nuts for doing a project like what we were doing in downtown. We were getting ready to set the high water mark for condo prices per square foot on the project that we were doing. I mean, they were $450 to $500 a square foot. And at that time, that was very high for anything related to downtown. And my partner, I said, damn the torpedoes. Light rail's here. We saw what happened. We think it'll work. And we had a great location overlooking this park. And it worked. We sold out all the condos before we finished. So the neighborhood is very interesting also from a demographic standpoint. Older folk, younger folk, then get into the value graphics of, what's interesting to them. Politics are across the board, but they really wanted to keep and create a neighborhood that was what they wanted. And everybody got involved. And they still are involved, very much so.
The hotel project you mentioned was interesting too, reading about it, because it wasn't just trying to redevelop something and then sell everything to the highest bidder. You actually wanted a mix of folks living there. And that was targeted, I imagine.
Well, it was. It's interesting because the land that we acquired to build our condo projects was acquired from the city of Phoenix. It was leftover remnant land at the time that the eminent domain action was taken to get rid of the 250 historic homes and put in the freeway that went through the middle of town. And this was remnant space that was there. And when they created the park with the bridges, this was space that was literally next door, contiguous with the park. And so we got that. And at the end of the block on Portland Street next to Central was this old Best Western that had been avoided at the time that they did the eminent domain map, if you will. We did not know that it was up for sale until after a woman had bought it. We had a serious investment, $120, $130 million worth of development next door. And we wanted to make sure that what was at the end of the block was something that worked. We had seen a concept we liked that was down in Kentucky called 21C Museum Hotel, and went there, visited those folks and fell in love with what they'd done and said, let's try to do something like that ourselves. So we bought the hotel and it took us a long time to get it done, but we did, and it's up and it's running. It's doing okay.
That's awesome. I feel like there's projects like that all over the country. I know of a number of them in South Congress and Austin and in a number of different places where, old hotels become fabulous places to live. Yeah,
but it runs as an operating hotel. Mm-hmm. And it's in a unique location. We're literally right at the light rail stop at the Arts District. And we have a recurring event every month. That's our first Friday art walk. And it's on the New York Times top 10 recurring event. Literally, even in this kind of heat, we'll have 10,000 people out walking on the streets first Friday. And when the weather's nice, it's, 15, 17,000 plus. It's a great place to go. Now, as a result of all this activity, we've got some great music downtown. It's just down the road, and friends of the place called the Crescent Ballroom, the Valley Bar, and the Van Buren that are really Class A music venues. They're not large venues. They'll hold 300 to 1,500 folk. Live Nation runs one of them, and a buddy of mine runs the other two. And it's a great cultural spot.
It's very cool. You've done both high-end projects and conversions for artists and very sustainable projects. I'm wondering if developers typically vary their projects so much.
They don't. And that's probably why a lot of people ask me why my head hasn't been examined. But
not me.
well, my partner and I did a really fun project during the recession. First of all, during the recession, there's no money to do any real estate development. So you go out and see what you can do. A lot of time on our hands. A friend of ours acquired a 99-room SRO motel called the Oasis. And literally, it's on Grand Avenue, which is an old highway that runs northwest through a diagonal through the middle of town all the way out to Wickenburg. And this is where the old motels were located back in the 50s and the 60s when people would travel west. This was one of those hotels. And our buddy bought it. And he did not know what he was doing. He goes, come in and help us. So we went there. John and I assisted. And his plan was to do affordable condominium sales and to turn it into condos. And he was going to carry the mortgage paper back himself as part of his estate planning. Well, we got there at that time during the recession, you couldn't give away a condo, much less try to sell one. So I said, let's do plan B. And plan B was to do affordable housing for the artist community that had located big time there. We did that. We turned the 99 rooms into 60 studios and ones. And we learned how challenging it is to get financing, to do affordable housing. I learned that it's not a capital stack that you put together with equity debt. It's a mosaic of wherever you can find money to make it work. Well, what we ended up doing worked nicely. It's called Oasis on Grand. And we have 28 market units and 32 affordable units in it. And what we did is that we took the common area that would normally be like where you'd have a ping pong table or a pool table, and we turned that into an art gallery. And this place is filled full of artists. And our website's called oasisongrand.com. And you could do oasisongrand.com/wood. And that would be your website for your art, Jeffrey. And
nice.
It worked. We've had a waiting list there ever since we opened up. And the best part about it is that I was at a community meeting when we were getting ready to do the project, and the community action officer for the police department for the city of Phoenix came up to me and he says, "Are you Tim Sprague?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And he goes, "Well, I just want to say thanks." I said, "What do you mean thanks?" He goes, "When you guys shut this place down, the crime rate in the area dropped by 60%. And I mean, it truly was transformative. And this area now is really cool. I mean, it always was an art area, but I mean, it's safe. There is some really cool stuff being done there. There's a container project that's on Grand that some friends did, and it's a very innovative joint. And it's really fun to see this stuff happen.
Another thing that you've done is projects that focus on sustainability. And I think that that's a really important thing, especially now that we've discussed at the beginning of the show, the heat, climate change, and all those things. What types of features do some of those projects have?
Well, we call it our eco program. We made a conscious decision 3.5 years ago to have all our future development be very sustainable. And when I say very sustainable, that's an interesting challenge. Building things sustainably is very expensive. It's out of the norm. It's difficult to find consultants. It's difficult to find general contractors, different subs that are in tune with what you really want to do. So what we've done is that our goal is to try to build as sustainable as we can from an economic standpoint. We have 2 projects under construction now. One's called Eco Phoenix. That's in the downtown Roosevelt neighborhood, right around the corner from our condo projects. And we have one in downtown Mesa, which is 2 years ago, I would say downtown Mesa was next. Now I say downtown Mesa is now. ASU has a new presence there in their mixed entertainment area, which houses the Sidney Poitier Film School, which is very cool. But what we wanted to do is to try to do those things that made sense. We have solar panels on top of both of the buildings. They're vertical buildings that are 5 and 7 stories tall. The footprint restricts how much solar energy that we can use to support, but we get as much as we can. We have a water catchment system on one of the buildings that we use to irrigate the landscape that's at the grade level of the project. We've got a car share program we're doing for both of the projects. One of the things we did is we designed the projects from the inside out. So they're very insulated. We use top grade materials. We try to avoid any kind of red line materials in the projects. Air quality is great. We're opening up the first one here next month. The second one will probably be later on in the fall. And it's amazing what we have found is that there are folks that literally will go out of their way to live in a sustainable building. And what we've learned is that values really motivate folks to do things, and people seek out things that are important. I was doing an interview the other day, and somebody asked me, said, why are you so involved in doing something sustainable? And I thought about it for a moment. I said, I can answer that with one word. And the gal says, what's that? And I said, grandchildren. And yeah, I mean that. Been trying to learn as much as I can over the last couple of years about how to do this. And I learned that I'm very, very, very much just a student. And we have an awful lot to learn. And I'm hoping that we can, moment that we finished, we are willing to share whatever we have learned with anybody, because we think this is what needs to happen. An interesting thing that we're learning that I think our market, the multifamily market, is learning, which really goes to what Impact's all about. We really have to think about how we're going to charge EV vehicles. Where do you do that? How is it done? When do you do it? I was in a subcommittee at the mayor's office this last year. And, it's interesting. You drive around to any Class A apartment project in our town, and I think it's probably the same across the country, and people have late model cars. If it's a market rate product, people are driving late model cars. And look at what kind of cars they're going to be driving next year if they haven't already transitioned. I think a lot of where you house, where you live, is going to be determined by how your transportation is being supported. And if you don't have the ability to use public transportation or Waymo or Uber or whatever, and you have to have a car, this is a big part of your decision. So, and I think it's very, very difficult and expensive to retrofit an existing property. And so anything being built really needs to pay attention, I think, to how they're going to support their residents and their EVs.
There was an article today or yesterday in the local paper, the Arizona Republic, about arguments over parking requirements.
There was.
Related to transportation. And so I think that is something that comes up a lot. There's also an item, I think, in Route 50, which is a national publication talking about, rental properties and charging stations and those types of things. And here in San Francisco, my house, I live in an 1892 old Victorian, and we don't have a garage. It's just at the street. And
on the street.
We don't have a car, but my neighbors do. And so, if they wanted to buy an electric car, then where are they going to charge it? It's an interesting conundrum that comes in cities where the city wasn't necessarily built for cars in the first place. And obviously, I would like people to take Muni and take BART and
right.
walk and bike and all those things. But the reality is that there's a lot of folks that will use their cars. And so,
that's right.
How do you deal with that from a development perspective and a retrofit perspective, like you said? Because I don't know, do you run a cable underneath the sidewalk that's 10 feet wide, which is a beautiful sidewalk? How do you do it? It's a question I think that's vexing a lot of people.
Well, I think one of the things that we talked about in this subcommittee was, going to employers, looking at where people work, looking at parking garages, looking at public parking garages, and, look at that. In our part of the world, the cheapest electricity really being produced occurs during the day because of all of the solar. We have a nuclear plant that does not have a rheostat on it. It's either all on or all off. And you couple that during the day with the fact that we have a lot of solar here. Energy is cheap during the day. It gets expensive from 4 to 8 when people come home and try to cool off. So really the most logical place for somebody to plug in and get a cheap charge is either during the middle of the night at home, or it's during the day at where they work before 4. And so you've got to come in and balance that out and see what makes the most sense and what's the least cost to be able to retro.
You mentioned car share in one of the projects, and thinking about light rail and access, maybe even micromobility, those types of things. How much do you think about transportation generally? We talked about even electric vehicles and the hoops that you'll have to go to try to figure out how to charge them. How much do you think about transportation in your work?
A lot, a lot. We have three big items that are extremely important to us in terms of where we locate a property. Number one, transportation is very much key. The last thing I want to do is to promote the use of something that's going to make our environment worse than it already is. And if I can build something with our partners that is next to transportation, public transportation, and do that and make it work, by golly, we're going to try our best to do that. The number two on the list is art. Be in an area where art is very prevalent. It brings in a type of person and it creates a community and an environment that naturally shares. You get a sense of community. People become very active in that, and it leads to entertainment just because it's a reason for people to come. And the last thing that's really important to us is education. Being in an environment where people are learning and trying to become better is very cool. And it really sets a level in terms of where their values are, and that's something we want to cater to.
What have you learned from first getting to Phoenix from Oklahoma to now? What are some of the major changes you've seen in yourself since that time that you showed up in Arizona?
Well, that's a really difficult personal question. Now, and let me give you an idea of something that really hit us in the face years ago. When I moved here and we started doing development work, as I mentioned, we were working with 4 Canadian home builders, actually from the Edmonton, Alberta area. Great guys. I mean, unbelievably fun guys. And I can't believe that they took this guy that was completely green and allowed him to come in and run their show. It wasn't a big show, but it was a show. So what I learned is that going out and doing greenfield development on the outskirts of town, at that time, our first project outside that was different to what I was doing with the Canadians was in Chandler. Chandler's in the southeast part of the valley. And we were next door to an Intel facility that had just been built and a master planned community called Gila Lakes. And it was typical Arizona suburban sprawl. And so we built 144 units there. Very cool. And the lender on that project was somebody that was out of Portland, Oregon, and that's who brought us up to Portland. He said, "Hey, I've got this deal up here. I've got one that I really would like for you to do, and I need one that you can help me on." And one was a project was next to an office building they financed that had gone sideways. And so we came in, and the other was a piece of property that was on Cruz Way. If you know Portland at all, it's a major street that comes off of Interstate 5 going east into Lake Oswego. Neat piece of property, gorgeous, wooded. And we got up there. And so we got up there. We liked this piece of property. It was owned by the LDS Church, which was kind of interesting. But we bought it. We bought it from them. Great folks to work with. And we were up there. We thought, man, this is great. We love Portland. Let's see what else is going on. So we go out and we start looking at the price of property. And there was one line that if we went past that line, the price per dwelling unit was like a tenth of what it was on the other side of the line. Well, that was the restrictive area for services. And what I learned at that point is that how you get rid of urban sprawl is to stop providing services past a certain point. And it made me really look at what we were doing. We came back to Phoenix after spending time up there and really fell in love with Portland. But realized, I love the downtown in Portland, an awful lot of activity, and came back and saw what we had here. And I said, you know what? That's where we should be spending our time. And so the RFP came up that I mentioned for the first condo project when it was firmed that the light rail was going to come in, and we bought that and allowed us to do the second one. And we did the hotel, and now we're doing our fourth one around that area. And community, something that was around art, something around education, and definitely transportation. So what did I learn? I learned that the best thing that you can do in my business is to create community. I think you've got to be careful in terms of what size the project is so you can establish a relationship with your neighbors. And we call that human scale. And human scale for us is having a project that's not more than, let's say, 150, 170 units and try to have as much commonality as we can find.
It sounds like you created your own urban growth boundary.
We really have. I mean, it's very difficult for us to look at a project that's not close to light rail. It really is. And I sit on an advisory board of an entity called Arizona Housing Fund. We raise money to fill the gap for affordable housing projects that can't get over that last step. They've put together the mosaic of money that I was telling you about that we did at the Oasis. And there's always this little piece, a gap that's out there that you can't fund. And one of the things that's happened since COVID in the last couple of years is that the price of construction has escalated so quickly. We've had a blessing and a curse here. The Taiwan Semiconductor Company is a huge facility that's being built here, a $40 billion project. And Intel has a $15 billion project being built on the other side of the valley. We have 5,000 people moving in here to our county every month. And Maricopa County has been the fastest growing county in the country for the last 2 years, and it will be for 3 years in a row. That's phenomenal for our area, but we got to be very smart about it. We've got to make sure that we pay attention to what's going on. But we have a huge, huge housing need right now. So that's just a long way to say we need housing. We are lacking 270,000 dwelling units. We need a lot of affordable housing. And one of the things that's important and why we look to build affordable housing without it having great transportation, is only solving one part of the problem statement. And so you've got to look at that. We look at that, and it's not cheap, but that's where you got to go, I think.
It also makes things harder too. I think, one of the things that we've learned from looking at places like Los Angeles, when, the downtown or when a place becomes very popular and people get displaced, the people that relied on that frequent transit service that exists in downtowns and in central cities get, displaced to places far out. And so what happens is they still rely on transportation that maybe they don't have control over. And so it makes their lives a little bit harder. And I think that's another kind of piece that I think that you understand, but I wonder if other folks get it, that moving people out to the suburbs and out to the outskirts because of less expensive housing actually creates other problems for them going forward.
Well, it does create other problems going forward. At the time that we were all concerned what would happen if $4 gallon gasoline came into play. Well, it's here, and people have moved out. The last thing we want to do is to create more cars, build more highways. Let's try to take care of it in a rational way. It's a serious issue about having redevelopment take place and having people displaced. It's a challenge that we're going to have forever. Place gets popular, it gets cool. The artists can't afford to be there. The people that are there, they have to go someplace else and they get displaced. And all of the character and all the neat things that caused you to be there in the first place, they get replaced. And they get replaced by things that maybe is cool or maybe not as cool. Instead of that local Thai restaurant, it becomes some chain. And that is persona non grata for me.
Have you learned anything from the pandemic and what's happened downtown and maybe in downtowns around the country?
Yeah, we made a decision at the time that we started designing Eco Phoenix to have larger units. And we did that because we've always taken the position that the best way to win is to be different. Michael Porter, the old Harvard B School marketing professor, said, if you try to do best all the time in a certain category, there's one guy that comes in first, a gal that comes in second, and a third person that comes in third. And the only way that you compete in that is to lower price. The way that you win and do something that's quality is to build something different. And that's to find something that is not the norm. And when all of the compression was happening in terms of the size of units, we said, let's create a place where you could work. Well, golly, I could say that was prophetic, but it worked. And our units are a little larger. We have a place for people to put in a desk and literally to be able to work from home. And what I've realized is that we all know, large employers are trying to get people to come back to the office and people are working from home. That's that. And as a result of that, people have really gravitated towards their neighborhoods. And I just think that's been a big difference, especially in urban areas.
Yeah, here in San Francisco, it's interesting because a lot of the neighborhoods have continue to be really strong. And
Yeah.
the transit ridership on those lines that goes north-south, not to downtown, but north-south is actually better maybe in some places than it was before. So there's a lot of activity.
Yeah.
I've got like maybe one or two more questions.
Sure.
So recently the governor vetoed a plan by the legislature to have separate vote on expanding the transportation sales tax. And they separated out the light rail idea from major road building. I'm wondering what the impact of those arguments and that discussion is on the development community in Phoenix and future projects that you might want to pursue.
The folks that understand what happened in the development community, people that are peers of mine that really understand good growth, are very upset. Prop 404 was the one that was basically extending that. There will be a big campaign, or it is now, to make sure that doesn't go away. And I think we'll win. It took us a long time to get that in place, and it really helped to extend light rail. I think we'll win that battle, but it's going to be a battle. People that have their head on straight, I think, understand it. The city of Phoenix definitely gets it. We live in a very interesting state. We have a lot of rural areas that are very conservative, and they have a great deal of say inside our state legislature. I think that'll change here in the next couple of years. But and there's been a change that's been happening over time. The future of any state is going to be how well you deal with population growth and how well you deal with the amount of infrastructure that you build to try to support some place that's too far away from where the source is of whatever it is that you're trying to supply. And being able to have urban planning in such a way that you capitalize upon concentration of folk and density is the best way to do that. And that's what that, tried to do. And I think it'll come back around.
You probably talked to a lot of folks about development, about the city of Phoenix, about all of these issues that we've been talking about. I'm wondering if there's a question that you wish you were asked more.
I wish that not so much Phoenix, but just in general, we are not merchant builders. We are not people that go in and build something and turn around and flip it immediately. We like to establish community. We like to build community. And, the question is, why do you do that versus building something and selling it quickly? Probably would have made a lot more money over the years if I'd have done that. But I can tell you, there's nothing more fun than building a building that really turns into a community and getting to know the folk. Man, that's as cool as it gets.
That's pretty great. Where can folks find you if you wish to be found?
Well, they can go to our website, which is habitatmetro.com. I'm available. If they want to get in touch with me, they can do that. I'll give you my email address. God knows what's going to happen.
I think you'll be okay.
Okay. My email address is tim@habitatmetro.com. And I will tell you that I welcome conversation with anybody that is interested in development. And I welcome the opportunity to learn. Because I will tell you what, one thing that I've learned over the years that I don't know very much. So still trying to learn.
That's why I do this podcast, because I don't know anything either. And so I want to learn from other people like you. I appreciate it. Well, Tim, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time.
You're very welcome.
And thanks for joining us. The Talking Headways podcast is a project of the Overhead Wire and published first at Street Sprague USA. Thanks to our generous Patreon supporters for supporting this week's podcast. And you can find out more at patreon.com/theoverheadwire. And sign up for our 17-year-old newsletter by visiting theoverheadwire.com. To get the show each week, follow along at your podcatcher of choice, including Spotify, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, YouTube, TuneIn, Apple Podcasts, and many, many more. And if you can't find it there, you can always find its original home at usa.streetsblog.org. We'll see you next time at Talking Headways.